Okay, so welcome to the deep dive,
Yeah.
where we take, what you give us and we really like get in there. You know what I mean?
Yeah, totally deep dive.
So today's deep dive is going to be into The Prince by Niccolò Machiavelli.
All right.
And specifically, we're going to be looking at the Project Gutenberg edition,
Yep.
which was conveniently updated fairly recently on October 29th, 2024.
Very convenient.
And the translator is W.K. Marriott. So, we've got a pretty modern translation.
Right. Yeah.
So, The Prince itself, it's basically a treatise on political philosophy and statecraft.
Exactly.
And, it's a practical guide, for rulers. So
Yeah.
these can be both hereditary rulers or brand new rulers who have just come into power.
Right.
And Machiavelli dedicated this work to Lorenzo di Piero de' Medici,
Okay. Interesting.
which, really shows that he was intending to provide like real practical advice from,
Mm-hmm.
his own lived experience and from the study of antiquity.
Right.
So maybe we should talk about Machiavelli a little bit.
Yeah. What's his deal?
So he had a pretty interesting career.
Yeah.
He was involved in Florentine diplomacy from 1494 to 1512.
So he was right in the thick of it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Not just some guy writing in an ivory tower.
No, he actually got imprisoned and exiled for a time,
Wow.
but eventually he returned.
Okay.
So all this is to say that The Prince is not just theory.
Right.
This is based on real-world observation.
Yeah. The guy really knew what he was talking about.
So our mission today on this deep dive is to kind of like extract the most crucial and thought-provoking advice
Okay.
from The Prince that still remains relevant even today.
Yeah.
In terms of power and leadership and the dynamics of control.
That's what I'm here for.
Some of it's pretty controversial.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah.
But, our goal is to just like understand his perspective from that historical context.
Right.
All right. So first off, he kind of lays out like the political landscape.
Right. He kind of sets the stage.
Right. Yeah. So he talks about how all states are either republics or principalities.
Okay.
And the prince itself is focused mainly on principalities.
Right.
So he further divides those into two.
Okay.
Hereditary principalities.
Which are the ones that have been ruled by the same family for generations.
Yeah, exactly.
Like a monarchy or something.
Yeah. And then you have new principalities.
These are the ones that are just getting established.
Yeah, exactly. And this distinction is like super important because it informs so much of the rest of the book.
It's the foundation of his analysis.
Yeah, exactly.
So how do these new principalities even come about?
Well, there's a couple of ways.
Okay.
Some of them are like brand new creations.
Okay.
Like Milan under Francesco Sforza.
Right.
He just kind of like came in and like took over.
Yeah, he was a strong man, basically.
Yeah, and then some of them are like added onto existing territories.
Okay.
Like the Kingdom of Naples,
Okay.
which became part of the King of Spain's territories.
Oh, right.
So like Machiavelli argues that the method of acquisition really shapes the challenges of ruling.
Yeah, that makes sense. Different origins, different problems.
Yeah, totally.
So let's dive into these new principalities a little bit more.
Especially the ones that had a history of self-governance.
Right. These would be the ones that are used to having their own laws and freedoms.
Yeah, exactly.
And Machiavelli has some pretty interesting options for a new ruler in this situation.
Right, and they're not, exactly like gentle.
No, he's not exactly known for his subtlety.
Yeah, so for these cities that are used to their own laws and freedom,
Okay.
he proposes three main strategies.
All right, lay them on me.
So the first one is to ruin them.
Ruin them.
Yeah, like basically destroy their existing structures.
Wow, that's pretty extreme.
Yeah, it is, but,
Effective, though, I guess.
Yeah, the second one is for the prince to go and live there himself.
Okay, so like establish a presence. Right?
Yeah, like a direct and visible authority.
Yeah.
The third one is a little more interesting, I think.
Oh.
It's to allow them to keep their own laws.
Oh, so a bit more lenient.
But they have to pay tribute.
There's the catch.
And they have to set up an oligarchy that is loyal to the prince.
So basically like a puppet government.
Yeah, kind of like that. So he's talking about an oligarch.
Like a small group of people who hold all the power.
Right, and they're chosen by the prince.
Handpick, yeah.
And they govern in his name.
Okay.
And Machiavelli actually thinks that this indirect rule is the most sustainable approach.
Interesting.
It's kind of like strategic delegation.
Yeah, you let the locals handle the day-to-day stuff.
As long as they're loyal to you.
As long as they're on your side, yeah.
So he contrasts this with hereditary principalities,
Okay.
which he thinks are generally a lot easier to maintain.
That's a
Well, he thinks that in hereditary states, the ruler mainly just needs to avoid violating existing customs and traditions.
Like, don't rock the boat too much.
Yeah, basically.
And if the people are used to your family being in charge,
Exactly.
there's less resistance.
And he points to Louis XII,
Okay,
who lost Milan super quickly.
right. He couldn't hold on to it.
Yeah, as an example of how difficult it is for new rulers.
Yeah, compared to someone with a hereditary claim.
Right.
Okay, so having a solid foundation to your rule is obviously super important.
Yeah, and for Machiavelli, that comes down to two main things:
What are they?
good laws and good arms.
So basically, law and order backed up by force.
Yeah, exactly.
A classic combination.
He thinks that they are inseparable.
Right. You can't have one without the other.
Like, good laws can't be maintained without a strong military to enforce them.
Makes sense.
So when it comes to arms,
The military side of things.
yeah, he gets really specific about what kinds of armies to avoid.
Okay.
Mercenaries are like a big no-no.
Really?
Yeah, he actually calls them useless and dangerous.
Ouch.
Yeah, he thinks they are disunited,
Okay.
ambitious,
They're just in it for themselves.
right? They lack discipline and they have no loyalty to the prince.
Right.
They're only motivated by money.
Yeah, they're not going to die for a paycheck.
Exactly.
So what does he say about the historical examples of this?
Well, he says, look at the Carthaginians.
Okay.
They were almost destroyed by their own mercenaries. And Philip of Macedon,
Okay.
he used Theban mercenaries to his advantage.
Right.
And then he just, like, enslaved Thebes.
Ruthless.
Right. And then look at Milan.
Okay.
They had a disaster with mercenaries.
Yeah.
And Naples, too.
Okay.
It's a pretty strong case against outsourcing your military.
Yeah. It's like he's saying, don't rely on outsiders to fight your battles for you.
Yeah. Exactly.
Interesting. So, like, thinking about today, right? When we see a lot of private military contractors
Right. Yeah.
and even like heavily outsourced supply chains,
Yeah.
like, does Machiavelli's warning about that lack of loyalty still hold up?
I think it does.
Yeah. I mean, his point is about depending on people who aren't really invested in your success.
Yeah, they have their own interests.
Yeah, exactly. So if those interests don't line up with yours,
You're in trouble.
yeah, there's that potential for instability.
Yeah, or even betrayal.
Yeah, it's definitely a risk.
So Machiavelli contrasts these unreliable forces.
Mercenaries and stuff.
Yeah, with a prince's own troops.
Okay.
And these are troops made up of citizens.
Okay.
Or subjects of the state.
So people who have a stake in the outcome.
Exactly.
Oh, yeah.
He sees those as far more dependable and loyal.
They're fighting for their homes,
Yeah, exactly.
their families,
Yeah.
their way of life.
They're not just in it for the money.
Right.
So he uses the example of Queen Johanna of Naples,
Okay.
who had to get help from the King of Aragon after her mercenary forces abandoned her.
Oof, that's not a good look.
Right, yeah.
So relying on others for your security can really leave you hanging.
Absolutely.
All right, so let's move on to something a little different.
Okay.
The prince's personal conduct, like how he presents himself, his reputation.
Yeah, this is where it gets a little tricky.
Right, because it's not always about being like a morally perfect person.
No, not even.
In fact, Machiavelli makes a really interesting distinction
Oh, what's that?
between appearing to have good qualities
Okay.
and actually possessing those qualities all the time.
Right.
So he says that for a prince, it's often better to seem merciful and faithful and humane
Okay.
and religious and upright
Right.
and to actually be those things all the time.
Because sometimes you got to do what you got to do.
Yeah, exactly.
It's about projecting an image.
Right.
And that image can be more important than the reality.
Especially in the rough and tumble world of politics.
Right, because governing often requires you to do things that might be considered immoral.
Yeah, there are tough choices to be made.
Right. So he even says that a prince needs to learn how to do wrong.
Like when the situation calls for it.
Yeah.
So he's not saying be a bad person.
No.
He's saying be willing to do what's necessary,
Even if it's not pretty.
even if it goes against your personal morals.
And sometimes those tough decisions are what actually bring about stability and security.
Right, because sometimes being too nice can actually backfire.
Yeah, he has this whole thing about cruelty and clemency
Okay.
that I think is really interesting.
Yeah.
He uses Cesar Borgia as an example.
Okay, the infamous
This.
Cesar Borgia.
Yeah, so Borgia was not known for being a gentle guy.
No, he was pretty ruthless.
Yeah, but Machiavelli points out that his cruelty actually brought peace and loyalty to the Romagna.
Okay.
So it's like a counterintuitive argument.
Yeah, like sometimes you need to be harsh to achieve order.
Right. And he contrasts that with what he sees as like excessive clemency,
Okay.
which can lead to disorder.
Because people take advantage.
Right. Yeah. And then you end up with more suffering in the long run.
Interesting.
So it's like a few executions
Whoa.
can actually be more merciful than allowing chaos to spread.
That's a tough pill to swallow.
It is.
So thinking about modern leaders, right?
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes they make these really tough decisions.
Yeah.
Seemingly harsh decisions.
Right.
And they talk about, doing it for the sake of stability or security.
Right.
Does Machiavelli's perspective, offer any way to understand that?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
It's not saying they're right or wrong,
Right.
but it is saying that sometimes.
Yeah.
You have to make those difficult choices.
Right.
And those choices might involve some level of force or coercion.
And that might actually prevent a worse outcome.
Yeah, potentially.
So, it's a really complicated issue.
Yeah, it is.
And Machiavelli makes us think about it in a different way.
Right.
Okay, so then there's the classic question.
Oh, yeah.
Is it better to be loved or feared?
It's a big one.
Yeah, everyone wants to know the answer.
What does Machiavelli say?
Well, his ideal situation is for a prince to be both loved and feared.
Okay, so have it all.
Right. But he knows that's not always possible.
Yeah.
So given the choice, he says it's safer to be feared than loved.
Interesting.
Especially if you can't count on the goodwill of your people.
Right.
Because fear is more reliable.
It's a powerful motivator.
Yeah. People will do a lot to avoid things they're afraid of.
Right.
But, and this is important,
Yeah.
he also says you don't want to be hated.
Right.
Because that can lead to rebellion.
People will rise up against you.
Exactly.
So it's like a balancing act.
Yeah. You need to be feared enough to keep people in line.
Right.
But not so feared that they hate you.
It's a fine line.
Yeah, it is.
So how does keeping your word fit into all this?
Yeah, the whole honesty thing.
We're always taught to keep our promises.
Yeah, it's like a basic moral principle.
Right.
But Machiavelli has a more nuanced view.
Okay.
He says a ruler shouldn't honor his word if it's against his interests.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, he's basically saying sometimes you have to break your promises.
If it's for the good of the state.
Exactly.
So he's not saying lie all the time.
Right.
But he's saying be willing to be deceitful if necessary.
If it's the best course of action, yeah.
And he uses Pope Alexander VI as an example.
Oh, wow, that guy.
Yeah. So he rarely kept his word.
Really?
Yeah, but he achieved his goals.
Because people couldn't predict what he would do.
Right, and they kind of underestimated him.
So it's almost like a strategy.
It is.
Yeah, Machiavelli's saying you can use deception to your advantage.
And he thinks that's okay.
As long as it's for the right reasons.
Right.
Okay, so let's say you're a prince.
Mm-hmm.
What are some behaviors you really want to avoid?
Like if you don't want to be hated by your people.
Yeah, what are the things that will make them turn against you?
Well, Machiavelli has a few ideas.
Okay.
First off, rapacity.
Like being greedy and taking what isn't yours.
Yeah, especially seizing property and women.
Yeah, that'll get people riled up.
Right, and then being seen as frivolous or effeminate.
Like not taking your job seriously.
Right, or appearing weak or cowardly.
Those are all bad looks for a leader.
Yeah, basically anything that makes you look unfit to rule.
Makes sense.
You need to project an image of strength and competence.
Yeah, if you want people to respect you.
Right.
Okay, so let's talk about fortune and ability.
Okay.
Or, as Machiavelli calls them, fortuna and virtù.
But those are good Italian words.
Yeah.
So is Machiavelli saying that leadership is all about luck?
Or is it more about skill and agency?
Yeah, is it nature or nurture?
Right.
What's the balance?
Well, Machiavelli acknowledges that fortune plays a role.
Like sometimes you're just in the right place at the right time.
Yeah, or the wrong place at the wrong time.
Right.
He compares fortune to a powerful river
Okay.
that can just sweep everything away.
That's a good analogy.
Yeah.
But he also believes that a good prince, a capable prince,
Okay.
can prepare for fortune's unpredictability.
So, build dams and levees.
Yeah, exactly. Like be ready to seize opportunities when they arise.
Right.
And to weather the storms.
To be resilient, yeah.
It's not about just passively accepting fate. It's about actively shaping your destiny.
Yes, so he's talking about virtù.
Which is more than just being a good person.
Right.
It's about having the skills and the qualities that are necessary to be an effective leader.
Strength, courage, adaptability.
Yeah, exactly.
So who are some examples of leaders with virtù?
Well, he brings up a few really interesting figures.
Okay.
Moses,
Okay.
Cyrus,
Right.
Romulus.
The founder of Rome.
Yeah, and Theseus.
So these are all legendary figures.
Yeah.
Larger than life.
And they all rose to prominence through their own abilities.
They were able to take advantage of the circumstances they found themselves in.
Exactly. They saw the opportunities and they seized them.
Okay, so they represent the virtue side of the equation.
Yeah.
So who represents the fortuna side?
Well, he contrasts those guys with people like Francesco Sforza,
Okay.
who became the Duke of Milan through his skill and his political maneuvering.
Okay.
And then Cesare Borgia.
Oh, Borgia again.
Yeah, so Borgia got a lot of help from his dad.
Pope Alexander VI.
Yeah, exactly.
So he had a lot of advantages.
Yeah.
But then his dad died.
Right.
And he got sick.
Yeah, and his power just kind of like...
Crumbled.
Yeah.
Even though he was a skilled strategist.
Right.
So Machiavelli's saying that sometimes even the best laid plans
Can be ruined by bad luck.
Exactly.
All right, so let's talk about conspiracies.
Okay.
They're like a constant threat to rulers.
Yeah. Someone's always trying to take you down.
Right.
So how do you protect yourself?
What does Machiavelli say?
He says that conspiracies are less likely to succeed
Okay.
if the people support the prince.
So, like, if you're popular,
Yeah.
people are less likely to want to overthrow you.
Right.
And he also talks about the importance of having a strong legal framework
Okay.
and the support of loyal allies.
So like a strong inner circle.
Yeah, exactly.
And of course a strong military.
Yeah, gotta have those good arms.
Right.
So he brings up the example of Messer Annibale Bentivoglia in Bologna, who was assassinated.
Oh, wow.
But his family was protected by the people.
So even though he was killed,
Yeah.
his family stayed in power.
Right, because they had the support of the people.
Wow. That's amazing.
Yeah, so Machiavelli's saying that the goodwill of the people is like the best defense.
It's better than any fortress.
Exactly.
So if you want to stay in power,
Keep your people happy.
don't give them a reason to want to get rid of you.
Right.
Speaking of fortresses,
Yeah.
Machiavelli doesn't seem totally convinced that they're all that effective.
Right. He has kind of a mixed view on them. Like,
Yeah.
he acknowledges that they can be helpful
Okay.
in some situations.
Like if you're worried about a popular uprising
Right.
or a sudden attack
Yeah. But he also points out that they can be useless.
or even backfire.
Yeah.
So what's his main argument?
His main argument is that the best defense is to not be hated by your people.
Makes sense.
Like, if the people are on your side,
Yeah.
you don't even need a fortress.
Because no one's going to attack you.
Right. But if the people hate you,
Then even the strongest fortress won't save you.
because they'll just open the gates for your enemies.
Right.
He uses the example of the Countess of Forlì,
Okay.
who had a fortress,
Okay.
which protected her from a revolt.
Okay.
But then Cesare Borgia came along,
Oh, Borgia.
and he had the support of the people.
So they let him in.
Yeah. And the Countess was defeated.
Wow.
So it's like a cautionary tale.
Yeah. Don't rely too much on walls and moats.
Right. The best defense is the love of your people.
All right. So apart from all these big ideas,
Yeah.
what other little nuggets of wisdom does Machiavelli offer?
Oh, he has a bunch.
Okay.
So first off, he thinks it's super important for a ruler to master the art of war.
Makes sense.
Yeah. He actually considers it the most important skill.
Because at the end of the day,
Yeah.
you have to be able to defend your power.
Right.
So he uses the example of Francesco Sforza again,
Okay.
whose military skills led to his rise to power. But then his sons didn't care about military matters.
They got lazy.
Yeah, and they lost everything.
So the lesson is...
Don't neglect your army.
Right.
What else?
He also stresses the importance of choosing good advisors.
Okay.
Like people who are capable and loyal.
People you can trust.
Yeah, he brings up the example of Pandolfo Petrucci
Okay.
and his secretary, Messer Antonio da Vanafro.
Okay.
And they had a really strong relationship.
Built on trust.
Yeah.
So Machiavelli's saying, find your Messer Antonio.
Yeah, exactly. He talks about seeking counsel wisely,
Okay.
like knowing when to ask for advice and when to make your own decisions.
Right.
And he also talks about the importance of valuing truthfulness in your advisors.
Like you don't want yes men,
No, you want people who will tell you the truth.
even if it's not what you want to hear.
Exactly.
What else?
He talks about gaining renown through great enterprises.
So like doing big, impressive things.
Yeah, like building stuff or winning battles or,
Making a name for yourself.
Yeah, exactly.
And he uses Ferdinand of Aragon as an example,
Okay.
who was known for his grand projects.
Right.
And he also talks about the importance of making clear decisions
Okay.
and taking sides in conflicts
Right.
when necessary.
Unless the conflict is with someone who's more powerful than you.
Right. Pick your battles carefully.
Yeah.
Anything else?
Yeah, the last chapter is really interesting.
Okay.
It's called The Exaltation to Liberate Italy from the Barbarians.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And it's basically a call to action.
Like a patriotic rallying cry.
Yeah.
So what does he say?
He says that Italy is divided and oppressed,
Okay.
and that it's the perfect time for a new prince to emerge and unite the peninsula.
Like a new Italian hero.
Yeah, he even compares this new prince to figures like Moses and Cyrus.
Oh, wow, those are some big shoes to fill.
Yeah.
So he's calling for a leader who can free Italy from foreign domination.
Exactly.
And he thinks that the Medici family might be up to the task.
Yeah, he's putting a lot of faith in them.
Interesting.
So it's a pretty passionate ending to the book. You
Yeah.
know, after all that cold, hard realism,
Right.
he ends on a note of idealism.
A little bit of hope for the future of Italy.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so as we wrap up this deep dive into The Prince,
Yeah.
I think it's safe to say that it's a pretty complex work,
It is.
full of thought-provoking ideas.
Yeah.
And even though it was written centuries ago,
Right.
a lot of what Machiavelli says is still relevant today.
Absolutely.
So for you listening out there,
Yeah.
I think some of the key takeaways from The Prince are
Okay.
the idea that it might be more important to appear virtuous than to actually be virtuous all the time.
Right.
And the warning against relying on mercenaries for your security.
Yeah, definitely.
And also that sometimes a leader needs to be willing to use force or even cruelty
Yeah.
to maintain order and stability.
It's heavy stuff.
It is.
So here's a final thought for you. Think about everything we've discussed about leadership and power
Okay.
and how that compares to what you see in the world today.
In politics and business and even your own life,
Yeah, exactly.
are the things that Machiavelli talked about still true?
Or has the world changed so much that they're no longer relevant?
That's a good question.
It's something to think about.
Yeah.
And we encourage you to keep exploring The Prince.
It's a book that keeps on giving.
Yeah.
So thanks for taking this deep dive with us.
Bye for sharing your source material.
See you next time.
Bye.